Ave Maris Stella.
Hello, this is post-production Father Matthew Schneider, and I just want to come in here early and admit that this episode is a little sliced together at the end because my audio started to go, but Sister's audio is great, so I kept the interview with her and just re-recorded my parts. I hopefully got them nice, but there could be a little bit of a choppiness. Hello, and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. I'm your host, Father Matthew Schneider, a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network on sqpn.com. Today, day 37, we're interviewing Sister Hosea Rupprecht, FSP, to introduce into Mirifica. FSP is Daughters of St. Paul. This is our second document in the podcast. We just finished Sacrosanctum Concilium. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. So who is Sister Hosea? I just want to introduce her. She is a member of the Daughters of St. Paul. They're dedicated to the media. They're the ones who published my book on autistic prayer. She has an MTS from the University of St. Michael's College in Toronto, Canada, and an MA in Media Literacy from Webster University in St. Louis. She is the Associate Director of the Pauline Media Studies and the author of How to Watch Movies with Your Kids, a Virtues-Based Strategy. So anything else you want to add, Sister?
Well, thank you for that introduction, Father Matthew. One of the main things that I do as part of Pauline Media Studies is I'm a speaker on media and faith topics, kind of all over parish, diocesan, national levels. And I am an approved Rotten Tomatoes film critic. So you could, if you're looking for, I want to know about film, look on Rotten Tomatoes and you can look me up and I'm there.
Oh, okay. So you and Deacon Stephen Greydanis are like the Catholic Rotten Tomatoes film critics.
Yeah.
You have tough shoes to fill. You're the third guest we've had on here, and the other two are both theology professors. So it might be a little.
Totally not a theology professor here, but love media.
No, but I think I think it's important. I think, we're going to talk about Inter Mirifica, which is on the media, and your community is dedicated to that. So that's why I asked, I had not met Sister Hosea beforehand. I know several of the sisters in the Daughters of St. Paul from publishing my book and from different social media things. So I sent a note, Facebook message to like 5 or 10 of them together. And I said, hey, I'm looking for somebody to interview for Inter Mirifica. Who do you suggest? And they suggested 2 sisters and you and one other, and it ended up being you who's doing the interview. So Inter Mirifica is the second document of the council. It was approved in November 1963 and then promulgated December 1963. So this interview, we're going to talk about 3 things. We're going to talk about why does the media talk about this? Why does the church talk about media? Obviously the media talks about the media. The document itself, Inter Mirifica itself, and then a little bit on the church and the media since Inter Mirifica, right? I think for a lot of people, when they first see this, they first wonder, why does the church talk about this? Because I think people understand, okay, the church is talking about abortion. It's talking about, Christ's salvation, things like that. But then media, people might not immediately know why the church would write a document on that. Can you explain a little bit about why the church talks about that?
Sure. As you know, and your podcast listeners will see when you talk about Gaudium et Spes, which is probably towards the end of your list, the church is interested in society and how society influences Catholics in their thinking, not just about religious or spiritual topics, but also about secular topics and the influences that come from the world in which we live. And media is such a huge part of society and the way society communicates that even, way back in the 1960s, the church recognized the need to chime in on the positive and the negative aspects of communication media to be a guide for Christians. And, it's been like that from the very beginning of mass media. And I think it's even more important now, with the emergence of digital media and the whole culture that has grown up around that. And even how we behave and communicate as human beings has changed so much, as well as, with artificial intelligence coming along and all the all the ethical questions coming with that and how best to utilize AI and everything. And the church is very interested in that because people, Catholics and Christians, are involved in that. And that has a big impact and an influence on the way we think, the way we pray, the way we relate. And that is all the purview of the church as well.
Yes, excellent. So, I think that we do have that idea because I don't think a lot of people think about how the church has that whole thing on society, right? Gaudium et Spes, which I think is the last or second last document. So the end of the year, because I'm taking the documents chronologically as they were approved in this podcast. It is a big thing in Gaudium et Spes. So was this like the first real document on the media from like, the level of like a pope or council or things like that? Or were there documents before this? Because I'm not super aware of too many documents before Inter Mirifica.
The Inter Mirifica was the first time an ecumenical council addressed the media. But there were 2 papal encyclicals before Vatican II that touched upon the media. So the first one was called Vigilante Cura on motion pictures. And that was Pius XI, and it came out in 1936. So very early on, also in film. And then Miranda Proris, which was on motion pictures, radio, and television, was an encyclical from Pope Pius XII in 1957. So not too far before Vatican II. And both of those documents focused more on being warnings to the faithful about the power of the emergent communications technology and the messages that were being communicated through that technology. But Miranda Proris specifically called the media gifts of God that had great potential for good and for evangelization. So even from the very beginning, the church has had a really positive but cautionary teaching about the media. And then, of course, Inter Mirifica picked up on that. Positive, but still cautionary in the way that they want the faithful to approach the media. So we had two encyclicals before Inter Mirifica.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about that, how the media had become, bad messages, when I think of like the mid 20th century, I think a lot about propaganda in the media as well. You think of World War II, both in the U.S. in positive ways and in like, Germany and things like that, or communism or different things like that, where they would use the media. Is that kind of like, is that a big part of what Inter Mirifica is responding to? Or is Inter Mirifica responding to something else? What's kind of like the main aspects of media that it's responding to?
I think the propaganda idea is part of it. I think that actually in Mirifica, the church was more focused on the moral implications of media messages. Of course, propaganda is a media message that, is trying to manipulate people's ideas and everything. So the thing is that at that time, mass media, with radio and television and film, would be the main parts. And of course, the press, newspapers and everything. Mass media was becoming more influential. And I think people were finally figuring out that this is happening and that we need to address it. So originally, I found out that communications media wasn't even on the agenda for Vatican II, but they made some kind of last minute preparatory commission in order to help journalists. And they called it the Secretariat for Press and Entertainment. And that particular group was the catalyst for introducing media as a topic for Vatican II. They just kind of took it upon themselves to prepare a document. It's like, oh, well, we see this need. Let's do a document. We can give it to them. And if they want it, they can take it. If they don't want it, well, they don't. But that document became the basis of Inter Mirifica and after Vatican II, Communio et Progressio, which of course we'll talk about a little bit later.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Now we're going to move on to the document itself. When I read Inter Mirifica, some parts of it seem to be speaking about the church itself, and other parts seem to be in the media, using the media, and the other parts seem to be speaking about the church's response to media used outside the church. those seem to be some of the main themes of Interim Mirifica. Would you say those are the main themes, or would you give something else as the main themes of the document?
I think you could do that. I think there are two main messages that Interim Mirifica has, and the first is that the church has something to say about the media, and even has the right not only to comment on how media should be used, but the right of the church to use media in order to proclaim the gospel, the work of evangelization. And I think the second message of the document is that the church needs to be involved in educating people on how to use the media well, how to be responsible and discerning. And not just lay people, but priests and religious educators too, and not just Catholics, but media professionals, so that when they do their jobs, they end up producing media that is uplifting for people and not destructive. And I also need to say here, Father, that, as a daughter of St. Paul, Interim Mirifica for us is a big deal. Our founder, Blessed James Alberione, began the Pauline family in 1914, so quite a bit before Vatican II. And at the beginning, he had a hard time making the church bigwigs understand how important the media apostolate was going to be in the 20th century. And he attended every single session of Vatican II. And seeing Interim Mirifica promulgated was the church kind of catching up, if you will, to Blessed James's vision of social communications media being an apostolate that could not only serve the church's mission of evangelization, but could also lead a person to holiness through a media spirituality. And that's really what I'm involved in. So, when I think of Interim Mirifica, I kind of get really excited about it, because it's the first time the church specifically calls for the kind of work that I'm doing on a daily basis. And I think that's just really awesome.
No, that's wonderful. Now, you mentioned Blessed James Alberione. Was he ever on any of the committees that drafted this document, or was he part of the public discussion around this document that led to the document we have in Vatican II? I know he survived just a little bit past Vatican II, but I can't remember the exact year he died.
He did. He passed away in 1971. And he never said a word in the council. He sat and he observed and he listened. And it's kind of been maybe like a little badge of honor for us, our founder's humility in the fact that he had spent almost 50 years before Vatican II doing the media apostolate. And he could have really given his opinion and contributed to that. And he chose to stay silent. And it showed really what a son of the church he was, in that he was ready to accept whatever the church was going to say about the media. But everything it did say really confirmed what he had been doing for years before that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I have read several different things by him. I know, my own work, I've done a lot in media, social media, etc., and things like this podcast, and he's one of the ones who speaks most about that. And then recently, I was reading a book, Vatican II Religious Life, put out by the Daughters of St. Paul in the late 60s, and it had a bunch of documents of Vatican II. Some of the follow-up documents were after the Council on Religious Life, and then commentaries by people like Fulton J. Sheen, but also by Blessed James Alberione, and obviously because put out by the Daughters of St. Paul, you kind of emphasize your own founder a little more than another collection might, and things. So that was a great book, actually. Now, moving on to the document Interim Mirifica itself, it's really broken up into two chapters. The first chapter is paragraphs 3 through 12, is more the theoretical things, more talking about what does the church teach in general, and not as practical, which we'll get into in chapter 2. Can you give us a little overview of chapter 1?
Sure. You're right. Chapter 1 focuses on church teaching. This is where they talk about the right to teach and make media for evangelization. And morality is a big issue in Interim Mirifica. It talks about honest and accurate information in news reporting. It talks about art and morality, that art and media is an art form. That art be produced to be uplifting for the human person and to lead the human person to fullness of joy. And so that when people make media, that art would be full of dignity and lead people to the fullness of joy. And I just thought that particular terminology was just lovely. There's a couple of other things to note in chapter 1. In paragraph number 8, there's an emphasis on the dignity of the human person, especially in the area of public opinion. So the church is acknowledging that through the media, she can help form public opinion to work towards social justice, the common good of everybody. And that's sometimes, because people make media in order to make money. And the church is saying, no, that's not all, that we need to use this very powerful means in order to work towards social justice and the good of people. And paragraph 9 actually addresses something that we see a lot of talk about in the media today, which is personal responsibility. Problems that come as a result of the more negative messages that come through the media aren't always the media's fault. There's personal responsibility as well. And if you don't mind, I'm actually going to say a little quote there. It's like, the document says, those who receive the means of social communications, readers, viewers, audiences, do so of their own free choice. Special obligation rests on them in consequence. So, we can't just sit here and say, it's all the media's fault. It's partially the media's fault. And they actually cover that in paragraph number 11. But the onus of responsibility for what we do with the media is on the user. And that's why teaching Catholics, but especially like parents and educators, media literacy is so important, so that they can then teach young people how to be discerning when they're using their media. And that's what paragraph 10 is all about. So that's a nice little overview of the first chapter.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I see things like that a lot of times when you have the discussions about when kids should get cell phones. There's a lot of parents are getting them really early now, and then parents are all concerned. And you realize that like a 10-year-old might not have the discernment to get a cell phone, whereas a 16-year-old, if you've trained them for a few years first, is not going to be the perfect cell phone consumer, but it's going to be a lot more prepared for something like that. No, I'm not saying exactly 16 or anything like that, any specific age, but I do think, waiting a little longer and helping the kids understand what a cell phone means is really important. But then moving on to chapter 2, it talks about the pastoral activity of the church. And I was hoping you can give me a little overview of what is covered in that part of Inter Mirifica.
So the second part is definitely more practical. And it starts off by saying that media is a good thing, kind of echoing Miranda Porces, that media are gifts of God. So Inter Mirifica is saying that the church needs to produce good media that's going to aid in evangelization and catechesis, and that the Catholic press should be supported and encouraged, right? As well as, radio and television, which of course was basically all that they had at the time of Vatican II. So if Inter Mirifica was being written now, it would include social media and artificial intelligence, right? The other part of chapter 2 emphasizes formation and education. Not only formation in the media, like how media works, but also in Catholic doctrine and in Catholic morality, so that those topics become more understandable for people, but as well as the technical aspects of media production to really ensure like good quality media production, as well as content that's in line with the church's teaching. And it's actually taken a lot of years for the quality of religious media to get on an even plane with secular media. The technology explosion that we're still right in the midst of has helped a lot in that regard. And the quality of religious media has really increased greatly in the last decade or two. So that's some of it. But there's a couple of other things that I wanted to just touch on that are of note in chapter 2. And that's paragraph 16 is really the foundation of the work that we do here at Pauline Media Studies. The council doesn't use terminology like media literacy, but the concept is there. And so they're saying that the people who receive media we have different ages, different cultures, different experiences, and therefore we need instruction and practical experience that helps all those different ages and peoples and experiences to be able to understand what is going on in the media, that they need instruction and practical experience if they are to use the media properly. And there you have it, the blessing of the church to do media literacy in the context of faith formation. And, when I started this work in the early 2000s, sometimes people in the church, they didn't get it. It's like, what does media have to do with faith? Well, the birth of social media really in 2012 and the rapid fire way that has changed the digital landscape, that people get it now more than they did. So it doesn't take a whole lot of convincing for me to get parents and educators on board with media literacy, because especially for the young. And that part of the document, as far as I know, Inter Mirifica is the only Vatican document to do this, but they promulgated an annual celebration for Catholics to remind us of how important the media is. So in Vatican II, Inter Mirifica instituted World Communications Day, which, we're going to talk about a little bit later. And it's unfortunate that not a lot of people in the church, even like in diocesan communications offices, don't even acknowledge that World Communications Day exists. And so I think that's kind of up to us who do know that it exists to kind of, help get the word out there. And the last major point of the second part, I think, is that the council members realize that Inter Mirifica really only scratches the surface of the church's understanding of media. But there's a lot more to be considered. And the original document that the little group proposed had 114 paragraphs in it. And Inter Mirifica only has 24. And so, what happened to the rest, right? So in Inter Mirifica, they specifically say, okay, folks, we need to do some follow-up. And so the follow-up then became what Communio et Progressio was, that came out in 1971. It kind of took up all it filled the gaps.
All the follow-up, yeah.
And it filled the gaps in Inter Mirifica. So a little overview there.
Yeah, we're going to move on to the documents after Vatican II next. There is a distinct difference in what we have in the church and media is in the last 50, 60 years. And since then, you just look at this podcast. Even if in the 80s we were to produce 800 hours of audio over the course of a year, try to distribute it would have been this huge, set of cassettes or something like that. Whereas, say, everyone has it on their phone, it's much easier to get it. But now, moving on to the documents, the first document after Inter Mirifica is Communio et Progressio in 1971. Can you give me a little overview of that document?
Yeah, it's like you almost can't take Inter Mirifica without Communio et Progressio. They're two sides of the same coin, if you will. And I think the major contribution of Communio et Progressio was the introduction of a communications theology. So it looks at Jesus Christ as the perfect communicator of God the Father to the world, and Jesus himself as the perfect communicator who teaches us how to communicate through his life. And that theology of the communication is founded on the Trinity. And the Trinity is a communication of love between the three persons. And none of that was present in Inter Mirifica. So Communio et Progressio fills in the theological gaps and the pastoral understanding. So besides the theology, Communio et Progressio also gets detailed practical points, such as how Catholics could contribute to the media, issues about publishing, film, radio, television, and theater, and also the role of media in society and human development. So they look at the role of media not only from, what should we do or what should we not do, but how does it affect us as human beings? How does it affect society in which we live? And again, you have that call for media education to teach Catholics, priests, people who are influential about how the media works and how to think about the messages that we get from the media. So Communio et Progressio was a great step forward in our understanding of media.
Excellent. Thank you. And the other document that I think about is Il Rapido Sviluppo in 2005, which I think of as the first document to talk about the internet. I'm sure that's not the only thing it says, but can you tell me a little bit about that document? We'll talk about the document that you mentioned as well as a third document afterwards.
Yeah, so it was actually John Paul II's last document before he died. It came out just about a month before he died in early 2005, and it was on the 40th anniversary of Inter Mirifica, and it was specifically addressed to those responsible for media. So and it's a really short document, if you're interested in this, go and read it, is that there was an invitation, and yes, the internet was, coming out at this time, and it's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen with this? And the main thing that John Paul II was doing is like, don't be afraid of new technologies, and he uses the words from Inter Mirifica because they rank among the marvelous things that God has placed at our disposal to discover, to use, and to make known the truth and about our dignity and our destiny as God's children, as heirs of the kingdom. And so the Holy Father was saying, let's look at this. Yes, all church documents on the media have some kind of caution, but let's look at this and see how we can use it to further the kingdom of God on earth and not be afraid. And I when I think about AI, I often think about these words of John Paul, don't be afraid of new technologies. If they're used well and properly and with good intention and with morality, then they can be of great benefit to humanity.
Oh, definitely. You mentioned a third document in your discussion there that I had not put in my notes. Can you tell me what that document was and what it taught?
Okay, so in between Communio et Progressio and Rapid Development, it was actually the 20th anniversary of Communio et Progressio, was a document called Aetates Novae and the Dawn of a New Era. And it was a pastoral instruction from the Council on Social Communication, so kind of the offshoot of the same group that started Inter Mirifica. And this one really delved into the cultural and social aspects of communication and their implications for the church. So the need for media literacy education was a big part of that. And it presents a good list of like pastoral priorities for like bishops' conferences to pick up on, and also challenges that the media presents as we go forward. So it was kind of an interim document there between Communio et Progressio and the Rapid Development.
Okay. And the other thing you mentioned in passing that I also have in my notes is the idea of World Communications Day. The Sunday before Pentecost for the last 50 years or so has been World Communications Day. And on each day, the Pope gives forth a message. I usually read it because I'm more involved in this kind of ministry than a lot of people. But then beyond that, we have certain of these messages have a little more importance, a little more that an average person might want to know them. Can you tell me about the World Communication Days that you think the average Catholic should know most about?
Yeah, so I think taken as a whole, there has been a World Communications Day message every year since 1967. So I don't know what number that makes us on, but it's, like getting close to 60. and together, and they're always around some kind of theme. So the Holy Father chooses a theme and then writes the message. And so together they constitute this body of church teaching about the media in a way that's always changing and developing. So, all the World Communications Day messages are up on the Vatican website. And like, for example, the one for this year, 2024, was on artificial intelligence. And the Pope has already announced the theme for 2025 on being gentleness in communication. And so they're a great way to keep up on what the church is saying about the most up-to-date developing communications technologies. So it's just a really wonderful way. And I mean, you've got everything from social media to listening and communication to children and education in the media. And so there's like such a vast variety of topics in the World Communication Day messages. And they're always pretty short, but definitely worth the read when they come out. Yeah.
Those are all very good. And it's very important to think about how we use the media, both as a church in what we do to promote the church in the media, and also as individuals, how we consume media, how we produce media, and things like that. Thank you for this interview, Sister Hosea. We will put the link to the Pauline Media Studies and to your book on watching movies with kids in the description. Is there anything else you'd like our audience to know about that you're involved in?
Well, you're doing this whole series on Vatican II, and at Pauline Media Studies, we've actually done a whole series of online classes that teach media literacy, media mindfulness, and there's one called The Panorama of Church and Media, and that's also, accessible through our website, bemediamindful.org, which you can find there in the link, and that is an overview of all the church documents on the media. So if you want to learn more about this, about Mirifica, about other documents, about some of the more recent ones like Towards Full Presence on social media, that particular online class would, be right up the alley of anybody who wants to know more about this topic. So that's a great resource.
Well, thank you, Sister Hosea, and thank you all for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one time, monthly, or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we are going to continue on with the next paragraphs, the intro paragraphs of Mirifica. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information, like reading, like a playlist for individual documents or reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information.